License and registration. The officer's stern voice cut through the night air. John Daniels reached for his wallet. He knew this routine all too well, but this time was different. This time, he had a secret weapon. As the situation escalated, John made a decision that would turn the tables on his aggressor. What happened next left the officer speechless and exposed a deep-rooted problem in our society. Are you ready to witness this shocking encounter? As we reflect on this real-life story, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell for more daily stories that need to be heard. Hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you. John Daniels navigated his sleek black sedan through quiet suburban streets, his tie hanging loosely around his neck after a long day at the FBI office. As he approached a four-way stop, he noticed a patrol car idling at the intersection. John came to a complete stop, signaled, and proceeded through, his movements deliberate and precise. Officer Thompson sat behind the wheel of his cruiser, his eyes narrowing as he observed John's vehicle. Something about the car, or perhaps its driver, had caught his attention. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but a nagging feeling in his gut told him to follow. John's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he noticed the patrol car maintaining a steady distance behind him. A familiar knot of anxiety began to form in the pit of his stomach. Despite his years of experience as an FBI agent, John couldn't shake the vulnerability he felt in these moments. The tension in the air was palpable as Officer Thompson's cruiser inched closer. John's mind raced, questioning every move he'd made. Had he come to a complete stop? Was he speeding without realizing it? He knew that sometimes, for people who look like him, simply existing could be enough to arouse suspicion. Subconscious racial biases often influence an officer's perception of potential threats or criminal activity, leading to disproportionate targeting of people of color. John was acutely aware of this reality, having seen its effects both personally and professionally. As the patrol car's lights flashed in his mirror, John's heart sank. Taking a deep breath, he carefully signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. With practiced movements, John turned off the engine and placed both hands on the steering wheel, clearly visible. He knew the importance of these small actions in potentially de-escalating a tense situation. Through his side mirror, John watched Officer Thompson approach, noting the officer's rigid posture and hand resting near his holster. The crunch of gravel under Thompson's boots grew louder as he neared John's window. John's mind raced through possible scenarios, his FBI training kicking in as he assessed the situation. As Officer Thompson reached the driver's side window, John braced himself for what was to come. The air crackled with tension, a stark reminder of the complex and often fraught relationship between law enforcement and communities of color. With his heart pounding in his chest, John waited for Officer Thompson to speak, knowing that his response could mean the difference between a peaceful resolution and a potentially dangerous escalation. The tension in the air was palpable as John waited for Officer Thompson to speak. His heart raced, knowing this encounter was different from any he'd experienced before. "License and registration," Thompson barked, his voice sharp and demanding. John's movements were slow and deliberate as he retrieved his documents, careful to keep his hands visible. "May I ask why I was pulled over, officer?" he inquired politely, fighting to keep his voice steady. Thompson's eyes narrowed, his posture stiffening as if John's simple question was an act of defiance. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand moving to rest on his holster. John felt a jolt of fear course through him as he carefully exited the car, the cool night air doing little to calm his nerves. As he stood face to face with Officer Thompson, John's FBI training kicked in, reminding him to stay composed even as his instincts screamed at him to defend himself. Thompson's suspicions seemed to grow with each passing moment, his eyes darting around searchingly. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," he commanded, initiating an unwarranted pat-down. John felt a mixture of humiliation and anger rising within him as Thompson's hands roughly searched his body. He thought of the countless times he had been in this position, the cycle of fear and mistrust that plagued interactions between law enforcement and people of color. The psychological impact of racial profiling weighed heavily on his mind. The increased anxiety, depression, and pervasive sense of distrust it bred. The glint of metal caught Officer Thompson's eye as John slowly pivoted. In that split second, Thompson's hand instinctively tightened on his holster. But as the full shape of the badge came into view, the officer's face transformed, his aggressive stance faltering as confusion washed over him. His hand, once poised near his weapon, now hung limply at his side. John held his FBI credentials steady, his gaze locked with Thompson's. The badge gleamed under the harsh streetlights, shattering the officer's preconceived notions. Thompson's eyes widened, his shoulders slumping as the air of superiority evaporated in an instant. He took a half-step back, as if physically recoiling from the truth before him. Thompson's mind raced, grappling with the cognitive dissonance of the situation. He had been so certain, so convinced of his suspicions. Now faced with irrefutable evidence of his mistake, he struggled to reconcile his actions with his self-image as a fair and just officer. I don't understand, Thompson stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The confidence that had fueled his earlier aggression had vanished, replaced by a vulnerable uncertainty. John recognized the internal struggle playing out before him, having witnessed similar reactions in his work with the FBI. As Thompson grappled with his biases, the wail of another siren pierced the night. A second patrol car pulled up, its headlights illuminating the tense scene. Officer Sarah Mills stepped out, her hand resting cautiously on her belt as she assessed the situation. John turned slightly, keeping both officers in his line of sight. He watched as Mills approached, her eyes darting between him and her visibly shaken colleague. Recognition flickered across her face as she drew nearer. "Agent Daniels?" Mills called out, her tone a mixture of surprise and respect. "What's going on here?" Her words seemed to jolt Thompson back to reality. He blinked rapidly, looking from John to Mills and back again. The validation of John's identity from a fellow officer appeared to deepen Thompson's internal conflict, forcing him to confront the full extent of his misjudgment. John nodded to Mills, a sense of relief washing over him. "Good evening, Officer Mills. I was just explaining my credentials to Officer Thompson here." Mills's presence shifted the dynamics of the encounter, providing an outside perspective on the situation. As the reality sank in, John could almost see the wheels turning in Thompson's mind, the officer's worldview visibly shaken. This moment of revelation had the potential to be a powerful catalyst for change, challenging Thompson's preconceptions and forcing him to confront his own biases. The encounter had shifted from a routine traffic stop to a profound moment of reckoning. As John stood there, FBI badge in hand, he knew that the repercussions of this night would extend far beyond this stretch of road. Thompson's search grew more aggressive, his frustration evident as he failed to find any justification for his suspicions. John closed his eyes, taking deep breaths to center himself. He thought of other victims of racial profiling, those who didn't have the protection of a badge or the knowledge to navigate these dangerous waters. At that moment, standing with his hands pressed against the cold metal of his car, John made a decision. The injustice of the situation, the blatant disregard for proper police procedures, and the emotional toll of yet another unwarranted stop crystallized his resolve. It was time to reveal his true identity. "Officer," John said, his voice calm but firm, "I think there's something you should know." He slowly reached for his wallet, feeling Thompson tense behind him. The air thickened with anticipation as John's fingers closed around his FBI badge. As he prepared to turn and face Officer Thompson, John knew that this revelation would change the course of the night, hopefully serving as a wake-up call for an officer who had let his biases cloud his judgment. Officer Thompson stood at a crossroads, his world upended in a matter of minutes. The harsh truth of the encounter with John Daniels weighed heavily on him, leaving him to grapple with the possibility that his actions had been driven by unconscious bias. As John's taillights faded into the distance, Thompson turned to face Officer Mills. "I was just doing my job," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Mills remained silent, her expression a mixture of disappointment and understanding. She knew the challenges of split-second decisions, but also recognized the gravity of Thompson's misstep. Back at the station, Thompson sat at his desk, staring blankly at the incident report. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, struggling to find words that could justify his actions, without admitting to the bias that had clouded his judgment. The weight of his choices pressed down on him, his heart racing as he contemplated the potential consequences. As we reflect on this story, remember that behind every headline, there's a person with a story to tell. If you're as moved as we are by these powerful real-life moments, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell for more daily stories that need to be heard. Your support helps us shine a light on voices that deserve attention. Hit that subscribe button. John's formal complaint landed on the police chief's desk, thrusting the incident into the spotlight. For Thompson, the personal and professional ramifications loomed large. He faced the possibility of suspension, mandatory retraining, or worse. The security of his career, built over years of service, now teetered on the edge of a precipice. As the investigation into Thompson's conduct began, a sobering reality came to light. Studies showed that only about 10% of complaints against police officers for racial profiling led to disciplinary action, highlighting the systemic challenges in addressing misconduct within law enforcement agencies. News of the incident spread like wildfire, igniting conversations throughout the community. Local activists seized upon the story, using it as a rallying cry for police reform. Town hall meetings buzzed with heated debates about racial profiling, implicit bias, and the need for more robust oversight of law enforcement. In response to the growing public pressure, city officials announced plans to implement community-led initiatives aimed at improving police-community relations. Proposals for citizen review boards and enhanced training programs on racial bias began to take shape, though skepticism lingered among those who had seen similar efforts fall short in the past. As days turned into weeks, the ripple effects of that fateful night continued to expand. John's courage in coming forward had opened a door, inviting others to share their experiences and demand action. The incident served as a stark reminder of the ongoing challenges faced by people of color in their interactions with law enforcement, while also offering a glimmer of hope for meaningful reform. The stage was set for a long-overdue reckoning within the police department and the community at large. As the story of John Daniels and Officer Thompson faded from the headlines, the work of addressing deep-rooted biases and rebuilding trust was just beginning. The true measure of change would lie not in the immediate aftermath, but in the sustained efforts to create a more just and equitable system for all. The encounter between John and Thompson illuminates the devastating impact of racial profiling in our society. Their story serves as a poignant reminder of the urgent need for change within law enforcement and our communities at large. As viewers, we're challenged to confront our own biases and take meaningful action. Supporting police reform initiatives and engaging in difficult conversations about race are crucial steps towards creating a more just world. Each of us has the power to make a difference, no matter how small it may seem. Civil rights activist Al Sharpton's words resonate deeply. We must hold law enforcement accountable for their actions and ensure that justice is served for all, regardless of race. This powerful statement encapsulates the core of our collective responsibility. It's a call to action, urging us to stand up against injustice wherever we encounter it. The path forward requires courage, empathy, and perseverance. By working together to bridge divides and challenge systemic biases, we can build a society where stories like John and Thompson's become relics of the past. Let this narrative inspire us to be the change we wish to see, knowing that true progress begins with each individual's commitment to justice and equality. Join our community of people who believe in justice, empathy, and powerful storytelling. By subscribing, you're not just watching, you're part of a movement that values real stories and change. Add us to your daily routine and make every story count. Subscribe and join us each day for stories that make an impact.